The homeowner had always taken pride in their quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where sidewalks gleamed after every rainfall, where mailboxes stood in perfect rows, and where the HOA worked tirelessly to make sure everything looked like it belonged on a postcard. Their favorite part of the home wasn't the roof they had saved years to repair or the flowers blooming along the walkway. It was the tall wooden fence standing strong along the property line. A fence built with care, painted with love, and serving as both a boundary and a symbol of how hard they had worked to create their safe space. Life here seemed calm on the surface, but beneath that calm was the presence of Karen, a neighbor who had become more infamous than friendly, known by nearly everyone on the street for her sharp voice, watchful eyes, and endless complaints that always seemed to target someone else. She didn't just follow HOA rules, she lived for them, bending them into weapons whenever it suited her. And more than once she had tried to point out imaginary flaws in the homeowner's yard, as though catching someone breaking a rule was her personal sport. Most neighbors had learned to smile, nod, and move on when Karen appeared, but that didn't stop her from hovering around conversations, walking past houses with a judgmental glance, or speaking up in meetings like she owned not just her property but the entire neighborhood. The homeowner had tolerated it, never one to escalate unnecessary drama, choosing instead to enjoy their routines, morning walks with a cup of coffee in hand, friendly waves from the quieter families, evenings relaxing behind that very fence, believing that as long as they kept to themselves, Karen would never truly interfere. But life has a way of testing patience, and on one afternoon that began like any other, with sunlight spilling across the streets and children laughing in the distance, a screech of tires would split the air, a crash would follow, and the homeowner's sense of peace would shatter into pieces as quickly as the boards of their beloved fence. The crash was so loud, it felt like the earth itself had split. And within seconds, the homeowner was at the window, eyes widening at the unbelievable sight of their beloved fence torn apart. Wooden boards splintered and scattered across the lawn like fallen matchsticks. And right in the middle of the destruction sat a car tilted forward. Bumper bent, hood smoking faintly, as if even the machine knew it had gone too far. Heart pounding, the homeowner rushed outside, neighbors already gathering with hands over their mouths, whispering in disbelief. The sound of footsteps and shocked gasps mixing with the fading echo of tires skidding. The driver's door opened slowly, and out stepped none other than Karen's teenage son, pale-faced and wide-eyed, brushing dust off his shirt like it was nothing, muttering under his breath as though the wreck he caused was just a minor inconvenience. Whispers grew louder among the crowd, some muttering about how many times they'd seen him speeding down the street, others shaking their heads at the recklessness, and yet before the boy could say a word, Karen herself came striding down the sidewalk, her tone sharp before she even reached the scene, her presence commanding the kind of attention only she could demand. But instead of offering an apology or checking the damage, she raised her voice at the homeowner, claiming the fence was built too close to the road, insisting it had been a hazard all along, and declaring loudly that the responsibility to fix this mess belonged not to her son, but to the homeowner who had put the fence in the wrong place. The crowd shifted uneasily, some folding arms, others exchanging knowing glances, and the homeowner, though filled with frustration, held steady, silently pulling out their phone, taking photo after photo of the smashed boards, the skid marks carved into the lawn, the mangled car still hissing in the wreckage. Every flash of the camera felt like a shield, evidence against the storm of accusations already pouring out of Karen's mouth. And though anger burned beneath the surface, the homeowner kept calm, because they knew the real test was just beginning, and this was only the start of a confrontation that the entire neighborhood would remember. Karen planted herself in the middle of the wreck like she owned the scene, waving her arms toward the broken fence as if she had just uncovered some grand injustice. Her voice sharp enough to carry across the entire street as she accused the homeowner of negligence, insisting the fence had no business being where it was, and demanding loudly that they take responsibility for the damage. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, some biting their lips, others shaking their heads. But no one dared interrupt as Karen's words cut through the air. Her son stood a few steps behind her, silent and pale, his hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes glued to the ground, clearly wishing he could disappear. The homeowner, standing firm at the edge of the lawn, kept their voice calm, refusing to match Karen's volume, pointing out that the fence had been there for years, approved by the HOA, inspected, and perfectly legal. They reminded her that fences don't suddenly leap into the path of speeding cars, and the skid marks leading directly into the yard spoke louder than any excuse. But Karen wasn't backing down. She threatened to call the HOA president, said she'd bring up violations at the next board meeting, and accused the homeowner of trying to trap her son with an unsafe barrier. Her words spilled out like rapid fire, her tone so forceful that a few neighbors stepped back as though they'd been struck themselves. Still, the homeowner stayed composed, phone in hand, continuing to document every angle of the scene, every board out of place, every inch of damage. Their silence was louder than Karen's shouting, and it made her even more frustrated, her face reddening as she realized she couldn't rattle them. Around them, the neighborhood had fallen into a hush, whispers dying down as everyone leaned in to watch how this confrontation would unfold. Because it was no longer just about a fence or a car, it was about truth, accountability, and whether Karen's usual tactics of deflecting blame would work this time. Karen's voice only grew louder as more neighbors drifted closer, drawn by the wreckage and the heated argument, her arms slicing through the air as she insisted that the homeowner was at fault, her tone dripping with certainty as though repeating it enough times would somehow make it true. She threatened lawsuits, HOA fines, even claimed she knew someone on the city council who could make this right. Her words spilling like wildfire while her son lingered behind her, his face tight with embarrassment. The homeowner didn't flinch. They kept documenting every picture, every angle, every detail, recorded carefully on their phone, because they knew the situation was spiraling into something bigger than a neighborhood spat. The neighbors muttered quietly among themselves, some whispering about Karen's history of stirring trouble, others shaking their heads at the audacity of blaming a fence for a car crashing into it. And with each passing second, the divide between Karen's words and the visible truth only widened. When the homeowner finally announced that the police had already been called, Karen's expression shifted, a flicker of panic flashing across her face before she quickly masked it with defiance, declaring loudly that she was glad they were coming because then the officers would see for themselves how dangerous the fence had been all along. The crowd fell into silence, anticipation heavy in the air, and the homeowner stood steady, calm but unyielding. Knowing this wasn't just about their property anymore, it was about refusing to be bullied into accepting blame that wasn't theirs. The sound of sirens in the distance drew every eye toward the street, red and blue lights reflecting off nearby windows as the approaching patrol car brought with it the promise of clarity, accountability, and the kind of truth that couldn't be bent to suit Karen's narrative. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing and engines rumbling, instantly commanding the attention of everyone on the street, and the tension that had been building for minutes snapped into sharp focus as the officers stepped out, professional and calm, scanning the scene with practiced eyes. Karen's confident swagger faltered slightly as she realized that her words alone wouldn't carry the weight they had moments before. She began repeating her claims about the fence, insisting it was the homeowner's responsibility and pointing toward the mangled wood as if it were irrefutable proof. The officers listened patiently, nodding politely but not committing to any judgment, asking for details, listening to both sides, and carefully inspecting the damage. They crouched to examine the skid marks, the angle of the car, the broken boards, and the dents in the fence posts, noting how the vehicle had clearly veered off the road due to loss of control rather than any obstruction from the property. Karen's son shifted nervously behind her, mumbling excuses under his breath, but the officers remained focused on facts, ignoring the theatrics unfolding around them. The homeowner handed over their photos, pointing out every detail. The fences, proper installation, the distance from the road, the long history of compliance with HOA regulations, and the officers' expressions remained neutral but attentive, absorbing the evidence with quiet authority. As the minutes passed, the truth became increasingly clear. The car was at fault, the homeowner had done nothing wrong, and the law supported them completely. Karen's voice rose again, louder, more desperate, trying to twist the narrative. But the officers remained steadfast, polite yet firm, explaining clearly that liability rested with the driver and that the homeowner could not be held responsible for someone else's reckless actions. Around them, neighbors breathed a collective sigh of relief, the crowd's murmurs turning from anxious whispers into quiet approval for the homeowner's calm approach, and even Karen's usually unwavering posture faltered as the officers informed her that her son's car was no longer drivable and would need to be towed, a statement that left her momentarily speechless as reality collided with her inflated sense of entitlement. As the tow truck pulled up and the driver began securing Karen's son's mangled car, a hush fell over the street, neighbors leaning in to watch the final outcome of the drama that had erupted just hours earlier. Karen's face shifted through every emotion, frustration, disbelief, a fleeting moment of shame, but she refused to concede, standing rigid as the officers calmly finished their report, clearly siding with the facts rather than her arguments. The homeowner stood nearby, heart still racing from the adrenaline of the confrontation, but a quiet sense of relief settled over them, knowing that the truth had prevailed and that they had remained calm and composed under extreme pressure. Neighbors began approaching, offering sympathetic nods, whispered congratulations and subtle smiles, acknowledging the homeowner's restraint and patience in the face of blatant deflection and entitlement. Karen's son remained silent, watching his car lifted and secured, his embarrassment palpable, while the officers provided clear instructions on next steps, confirming that any damages to the fence could be pursued with his insurance. But there was no blame to be shifted onto the homeowner. The street slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm, though the echoes of the crash and the confrontation lingered in everyone's minds, a story that would be recounted for weeks among neighbors, a cautionary tale about accountability and standing firm. For the homeowner, the day had been exhausting, emotional and challenging, but it also brought clarity. In moments of chaos, remaining composed, documenting the truth, and letting facts speak for themselves was more powerful than any argument or accusation, and the neighborhood seemed to recognize that, offering subtle nods of respect as the tow truck drove away, leaving behind only the fractured fence and the hard-earned sense that justice, calm, factual, undeniable justice, had won. With the chaos finally behind them, the homeowner stood by the partially damaged fence, taking a deep breath as the evening sun cast long shadows across the yard, reflecting on everything that had happened. The adrenaline of the crash, the confrontation, and the police arrival slowly faded, leaving a mix of relief, pride, and quiet exhaustion. They thought about Karen's bold accusations, her attempts to twist the truth, and the way her son had fled from responsibility, and yet, through it all, they realized how much strength there is in remaining calm, documenting the facts, and letting truth guide every action. Neighbors began returning to their routines, but several lingered briefly, offering smiles, nods, and quiet words of encouragement, silently acknowledging the homeowner's restraint and patience. The broken fence boards would need repairs, but more than that, the experience had reinforced a vital lesson. Standing firm in the face of pressure and not yielding to manipulation was not only necessary, but empowering. Karen retreated, frustrated that her usual tactics had failed, while the homeowner began planning the repairs, knowing that the yard and their peace of mind would soon be whole again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the street, the homeowner understood something profound. In every moment of tension, clarity, preparation, and calm decisiveness could turn chaos into a story of resilience. A story the neighbors would remember, and a story that ultimately was theirs to tell.